Gang, we've got to start in the Middle East. People are saying World War III is upon us. I think that's a bit of hyperbole, James.
I think it's a lot of hyperbole, but we have seen in the last 48, 72 hours, of course, this real conflict kick off now between Iran and Israel. Just the background to this, of course, is that Israel says, and in fact, actually, the International Atomic Energy Agency said the same thing, too, that Iran was really close to breaking out on its atomic energy ambitions. Israel struck first. They struck hard. They decapitated the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is massive. Now, Iran has been trying to hit back. They've, in the last few hours now, they've attempted to send more missiles in towards Israel. They've caused some damage. They've also targeted, I'm told, a plant in Haifa that refines jet fuel for Israel. Now, if they've done that, then this means that they're trying to take this conflict to a whole new level. I think the push now on Israel is simply they want to create regime change in Iran. They want to get to the point now where the mullahs are forced to flee the country to Russia or someplace else or surrender because they see Iran now as an existential threat. And the other thing, too, here, it's fascinating, the diplomacy between Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, and this whole conflict, because, of course, they kind of faked out the Iranians who thought, oh, Israel's not going to attack. Donald Trump doesn't want them to attack. Well, they did, and here we are.
It is going to be a fascinating situation, Caroline. Is this a project to essentially end Iran's nuclear ambitions, or is the goal really greater than that? Is this about regime change in Iran?
I think it's both. I mean, clearly, it's about stopping the immediate threat of a nuclear attack because, as Benjamin Netanyahu has pointed out, Iran has enriched enough uranium for 9 atomic bombs, and it was just a couple of steps away, possibly months away, from being able to have nuclear weapons. That is a threat not just to Israel, which is obviously on the front line here, but the rest of the world. And obviously, in that will be a regime change, which we should point out is being celebrated by the people of Iran, who do not, on the whole, like their leaders. This is seen, this is being celebrated there. People are happy. They're having parties and dancing.
But there's a real danger here, Caroline, because if the Israelis overplay their hand, you could say, and we see those civilian casualties increase, I think you'll see the Iranian people, even the ones who are very anti-regime, change their point of view. They don't want to see their own people slaughtered. So it is a really fine balancing act for Israel, but it's also a fine balancing act for Donald Trump. He's always been about strength, peace through strength. And he's also knows that his voters don't want to have another big conflict that America's at the heart of. So how does he balance the America First approach with getting rid of Iran's nuclear ambitions and perhaps the regime, because it is a danger to the US, not just to Israel? Yeah,
well, it's really interesting. A few hours ago, a quote dropped in the Atlantic magazine where President Donald Trump, and by the way, isn't it great now to have a president who can just pick up the phone and talk to journalists and talk to reporters and tell them what's going on and what he's thinking? He told the Atlantic, he said, basically, he respects everybody who wants to see peace, but he said also, peace does not exist. You can't have peace if Iran has an atomic bomb. And I think that's exactly right. You will note, by the way, also, and everything you say, Reed, is correct, but also you would note that there's been absolutely no opposition to Israel's actions across the wider Sunni Middle East, right? So, I mean,
there is plenty, though, around the world. You've got France, you've got
but France is not fully Sunni yet, okay? So let's just keep that in mind. But, traditionally you would say, oh, the Arab Spring would have been furious about Israel. There would have been death to Israel for attacking the Muslim world. No. They have the backs of Israel, the Saudis, everybody else. They're very close to normalization. Nobody in the area wants to see a nuclear Iran. It is not just the Israelis. So that's point one. Point number two here, Donald Trump, as you say, especially the Gen Z MAGA contingent, they really do not want to see any foreign wars. And I think he gets this. He wants to end this sooner rather than later. But, on the third thing, this whole regime change issue. Well, remember, this goes back to the Obama administration. You remember when there were all of the protests and massive, civil unrest in Iran. And Obama, for all of his talk about, loving democracy and loving the people and all of this sort of thing, he basically said to the Iranians, go for your life, because, of course, Ben Rhodes had helped him architect that original nuclear plan, which is what we're now seeing the end game of playing out. So a lot of this goes back to Barack Obama and his fecklessness in running the Middle East. As to what comes next, well, look, I don't know about you. Personally, I'd love to see the Shah come back. But, let's also remember that the reason why we have this regime here is that after the Shah was deposed in 1979, all these Western liberals thought, oh, it's going to be wonderful to have this new liberal regime. And then the mullahs came in and took over after the liberal regime was there for about 35 seconds.
We've had more than 40 years now of the mullahs, the Islamists, ruling Iran. And as you said, Caroline, there's a lot of Iranian people who would love to see Iran return to its former glory, being relatively modern, secular, successful nation. I think we're still a long way from that. But let's hear from Benjamin Netanyahu here. He's talking about appealing to the US, telling them essentially, our enemy is your enemy.
They've tried to assassinate President Trump twice. They bombed American embassies. They killed 241 Marines in Beirut. They killed and injured thousands of Americans with their IEDs in Iraq and Afghanistan. They burn the American flag. They chant endlessly, death to America. Our enemy is your enemy. And by doing what we're doing, we're dealing with something that will threaten all of us.
And then, on the other hand, we have the Democrats, rudderless, leaderless, increasingly led by the most radical elements within the party, like Bernie Sanders, AOC. And Tim Walz, the man who was going to be vice president, well, he's got an idea of who could possibly mediate a peace deal.
Now, who is the voice in the world that can negotiate some type of agreement in this? Who holds the moral authority? Who holds the ability to do that? Because we are not seen as a neutral actor. And we maybe never were. I don't want to tell anybody that. I think there's a lot of people who say you always leaned one way in this. But I think there was at least an attempt to be somewhat of the arbitrator in this. We saw President Carter do it with Begin and Sadat. We've had certain wins along the way that were actually mutually beneficial both ways. Now I ask who that is. And, I mean, consistently over and over again, we're going to have to face the reality. It might be the Chinese.
Excuse what? What moral authority? The Chinese? James, right. Take me through this.
Well, I mean, there's so much wrong in what Tim Walz just said there. I mean, first of all, for him to mention Carter, when Jimmy Carter was the guy on whom the Iranian Revolution fell, he was the one who let the Shah fall and missed all the intelligence and everything else. That was a disaster, so we lost that. But the Chinese being the neutral actors here. I mean, China, China, the selfless global humanitarian Xi Jinping is going to be the one to sort out this conflict. Look, let me tell you something here. This plan that Tim Walz had, this is entirely predictable because guess what? When he was running for vice president during that hilarious, 87 days or whatever he was doing that, remember when it came out, all of the stuff that came out about Tim Walz and China, how much time he'd spent in China, the number of trips he'd been there as an English teacher, his sympathies to the Chinese government. Well, you know what? We're seeing that right now. We are so lucky that the Harris-Walz team didn't come in because they would be abdicating their authority right now to Beijing rather than asserting American authority, which I think is what Donald Trump is trying to do here.
It's absolutely delusional. Like, China is part of this axis of evil, basically. It is anti-America. It tries to sow as much discord as it can in America. We're expecting it to be able to make peace in the Middle East when it's in Chinese interest to have as much division as possible there.
And we see like over and over in modern geopolitics, what do we talk about? We talk about the BRICS countries. What are three of those countries? Russia, Iran, and China. Like, these three countries are tied up completely in an anti-Western alliance. The idea that you would even bring China to the table on that is insane. It is nuts. It is bonkers. Tim Walz is, I'm sorry to say, he is just so stupid. I mean, it's just the ignorance. And then he would go out and say that and not be laughed at by whoever was interviewing him there. I mean, whoever was interviewing them, if they didn't in the next second pull him up, they should quit their jobs too.
They should. This is a man who wanted to be vice president, who has ambitions to be president, Caroline, and really is best known for putting tampons in boys' restrooms across his state. That's earned him the nickname Tampon Tim. And really, maybe that's the area he should stick to instead of geopolitics, because this is embarrassing work. Meanwhile, let's hear from Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth saying that Donald Trump was very much informed of what was about to happen.
American people can be assured that President Trump is dialed in. This is not an auto pen moment. You know, we had that where the world saw our gaze distracted or not paying attention at all. President Trump is dialed in. I get to see it every single day. He knows every single dynamic of what's going on here. And I'll tell you what he's doing, Rachel. He's putting America first. And you understand, hey, how many factors there are, how many dynamics there are in the world. But his directive to me and to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and throughout our forces, hey, make sure you are robustly postured and prepared. And we are.
Well, it's very different to this time last year with Joe Biden. If this was happening under Joe Biden, we wouldn't even know who's pulling the strings, who's making the calls. What a great change in government, really, and at a very critical juncture in what's happening in the Middle East.
And I mean, any sort of sense that people have, and I know this is a line that's going around here that, the White House was kept out of the loop, that Israel acted independently here, that is completely untrue. There's been so much contact between both governments here. And in essence, it was almost sort of a head fake on the Iranian government, on the mullahs, to say, well, the U.S. is going to hold Israel back, so, don't you have to worry about that. But you have to come to the table. And then they didn't come to the table. Remember, 62 days before the strikes, Donald Trump put a very clear message out there. You've got 2 months, you've got 60 days to come back to the table on a nuclear deal. Iran went the other way. They tried to break out their nuclear program. And on day 62, you know what? They found out.
They found out. They were messing around and they found out.
But this way, America gets to keep its hands sort of clean and say, we weren't involved in this directly. Obviously, this is the Israelis during the strikes. However, if you hit a single one of our U.S. military targets or people, we will come after you.
And that's the thing. I mean, it would be, there are some people, including some on the right, who are like, oh, no, this is going to be a disaster. This is going to be this whole huge Middle East war because Iran is going to start, hitting American troops at American bases. Well, that would be, if you want to talk about regime change and you want to talk about the end of the Iranian regime, that would be the surest way to guarantee that.
I don't even think the mad mullahs are that mad. I don't think they're going to be hitting American targets knowing Donald Trump is the president. You just would not take that chance.
You remember when Trump, took out Soleimani after there were attacks on American bases in Iraq?
We were told World War III was going to start there.